Hi, welcome to Day 12 of the 12 Days of Innovation Summit here in Birdville ISD. My name is Cheryl McKnight. I am the coordinator of digital learning and our blended learning project manager. For today's interview, we are fortunate to have with us Catlin Tucker. Catlin is an author, trainer, coach of all things blended learning. We've worked with Catlin for 3 years now in Birdville as we've been implementing our blended learning grant through Raise Your Hand Texas. And so I first found Catlin online as we were doing some research. And so Catlin, tell us about you, tell us about your journey as a blended learning teacher and now coach and speaker and all things blended.
Well, I'm excited to be here. Yeah, my journey had a little bit of a rough start. I think you and I have connected about that. So I started teaching when I was 22, and I share with teachers all the time that my first 5 years maybe in the classroom were challenging. I came in with this very idyllic kind of vision of what my classroom would be, and I imagined kids like bounding through the door, excited to learn and leaning in and getting excited, and that didn't happen. Kids weren't not really that excited to be there. It felt like they weren't excited to engage, and I remember having a real moment about year 5 where I thought, oh my gosh, I have made the biggest mistake. This is not the right profession for me. This is not what I thought I was signing up for. And I was very close to quitting teaching. And I decided instead of quitting, I was just gonna take a year off and have my first child. And it was on maternity leave, I decided to teach an online writing, like college level writing course. And I thought I'd bring in some extra income. It'll be good mental stimulation while I'm at home with my daughter. And that was the first time my interest in technology was really piqued. And when my tenure as a stay-at-home mom came to an end, I figured, you know, I want to go back to the classroom, and I want to try to weave in some of these pieces from the online experience that were so powerful. And that was really the beginning of my blended learning journey. And I credit blended learning with the reason I'm still in education, because it was after I started weaving in those online elements where every student in my class had a voice. Kids were leaning in. They were excited to be there. So it was a huge game changer for me.
Well, we are so glad in Birdville that you never left the classroom and left teaching altogether, because we have learned so much from you. I have a couple of your books with you, Blended Learning in Grades K-12, the Blended Learning in Action book. So for teachers getting started in blended learning, what would you say about these two titles, and what might they find here?
Yes, so this is my first one, and I am really honest that this book is a product of every mistake I made in those early years as a blended teacher. So I made a lot of assumptions about what kids would be able to do online. For example, you know, I imagined them, you know, they're always online having conversations, but they're really informal chats really that they're having. And so when I wanted to do online discussions with my students, we kind of jumped in, and then I realized, oh my gosh, they do not have the skill set to be successful in this space. And so I had to go back and figure out what routines need to be in place, what do we need to cover in terms of skills. Like, do kids really know how to navigate the online space for academic discussions? Do they know how to contribute to a conversation in a meaningful, substantive way? The answer was no to all of those questions. And so this book is really about, like, how do you get started with them? How do you teach them to communicate online respectfully and substantively? How do you ask questions that are going to drive dynamic conversations? How do you pull those back into the classroom? So for me, this is like a great starting place if you have teachers who are like, I just need a concrete place to begin. Whereas blended learning in action it was both teacher-facing and leader-facing. The Tiffany and Jason, who I brought on as co-authors, we really wanted to go over the different models for teachers and talk about lesson planning and kind of get them ready for some of the challenges they might encounter if they were using playlist versus station rotation, and then what are some creative solutions to get past those challenges. But then we also wanted some that were really leader facing. Like, this is what your teachers need from you to be successful with blended learning. So that one is great if teachers are really curious about specific models and they want to dive deep into that, or they want to look at digital curriculum and some of those other pieces related to blended learning.
So both of these books, you can tell I've earmarked them pretty well. Got a few little tabs in there. I'll just say that I've thoroughly enjoyed them. And when I read this one here, the first one, it was like, I knew you and I were going to be friends and we were going to have a connection. And, you know, again, just your support and just helping us really, I think what we've taken away in Birdville is that you have brought to us just so many very practical strategies. And I'm just going to say, the very first time you came to Birdville, that was just a game changer in our blended implementation. It was after that first training that our teachers were like, yes, I get it. Now I know what they've been talking to us about in theory for the last 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
And so that was just really insightful, helpful. So now as we've gone further along the work and you've had a lot more experiences yourself, it takes us up to power up blended learning.
Yeah, so I think, and I appreciate the compliment, thank you. It was a treat to work with those teachers. I remember coming in that day. And I think there are a lot of people who have been talking about blended learning and the theory and like why it's valuable, but sometimes as a teacher, what was missing for me from those conversations is that really concrete, like this is what it looks like in a classroom and this is exactly how you do this. So that's what I try to do in all of my books. And then now, you know, a few years ago, I went half-time teaching and I started doing a lot of blended learning coaching in actually districts all over California and a few virtually. And so that Power Up Blended Learning really came from my experiences from the professional development side and the coaching side. So to be really honest, if I come in for a day and I work with teachers and there's no professional learning infrastructure in place to support them after that day, my training, it might move the needle with some people, but for a lot of people in that room, they might have gotten excited, they might have wanted to try something, but there's an implementation gap that is real, you know? So they lack that confidence taking a brand new strategy or model and implementing it in their classroom. So as I started coaching, I just felt like there needed to be a book that helped leaders, professional development coordinators, coaches on the ground to be more effective in really supporting teachers so that there's always learning happening on a campus. So yeah, you can bring someone in like me and have that spark, but you also want the coaches who are in the room, supporting implementation, helping teachers think through what are my goals and how do I plan for this particular type of blended lesson, and okay, now let's reflect on how that went. And then also that PLC piece, like do they have time to actually meet together and work to kind of go through an inquiry and action cycle as a team?
So I want to go, the professional learning piece is so valuable, and I just really, not sure what chapter it is, somewhere around page 40 if you have your own copy of the book, not sure what chapter that is. You're talking about the value of leaders leaning in. So we've been doing some work in blended learning in our district, and we're at that point, we're having conversations about scale and sustainability. And we can train teachers all day in strategies and different things, but if we're really going to push the envelope and really make some changes that are, you know, that are really innovative and are going to transform practice, talk to me a little bit about what's the point here where you're talking about leaders really have to lean in, because I think this is such an important concept here.
Yeah. So I can't tell you how many times I have come into a district that is shifting to blended learning. It's a huge initiative. It's something that leadership says is a very high priority, and then there is nobody from the leadership team in that training. So, or if there might be like a principal or a vice principal who are there physically, but mentally are not. They're, you know, check an email, I get it, we got a million things to do, but if you're telling your teachers, this is really important, you need to spend your time and your energy changing your practice, then as leaders, we need to show how valuable that is by being at those trainings, by leaning into the trainings, having conversations with teachers, because when I'm running a workshop on a blended learning model with teachers know the hiccups they're gonna face. They might say, gosh, my furniture isn't this, or the schedule, or they're going to raise concerns or potential barriers that a leader, if they're sitting there, they're like, that's important. Mental note, or maybe that's something we need to think about. Or as teachers are being trained, if leaders are also going through that training, then ideally, as leaders are going in and out of classrooms, seeing what's happening, which I also definitely think they should be doing on a regular basis, right. They know what they're looking for. And if something's missing, then they can be a resource as well. It just doesn't all have to fall just on the coach. I think the leader has to show that this is valuable with their time and their attention and their energy. Otherwise, teachers can tell. They can tell the leaders who know what's going on, and or the ones who just say it's important, but they don't put that energy and attention onto that thing that they think is so important.
Right. So that the coaching piece that you just mentioned, super, super valuable.
Yes.
And so there's lots of different coaching models, but really what it amounts to is developing a relationship with that teacher and really diving into coaching. So you talk about coaching, several aspects of coaching in here, and I was thinking about the one chapter where you're talking about having those conversations and developing that trust. You want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So I do, there are a ton of books on coaching, and some of them are a little more concrete than others, but again, I've read several books on coaching where I'm like, but what is this? Tell me what this actually looks like, or give me a resource I can respond to, or that I can look at or I can use as a reference. And so when I was writing this book, the whole center chunk is on my coaching cycle, and it's just a cycle that I use with the teachers that I'm coaching. And so it really does begin with this conversation, right? Like, let's talk about you and your experience in education, and it's a dialogic interview where basically one person, their whole job is to ask the questions. The coach usually starts that, and then the teacher responds, and the coach doesn't jump in. They don't ask additional follow-up stuff or share their own anecdotes. The idea is to have the teacher share as much as possible in that response, and then after 15 minutes you kind of swap, and the teacher asks the coach and the coach just responds. And there's something different about this format where when you're not bouncing back and forth between the two people, everybody tends to go a little deeper, and it establishes this commonality between the coach and the teacher that creates that kind of beginnings of the trust in that relationship. Because oftentimes teachers are really insecure, they feel like they're going to get judged by a coach who's going to come in and point out all the things that they're not doing well or correctly. And so for me, it's the beginning. It's why I don't, usually I start with a conversation and goal setting together. I don't start with the observation, because I don't want to jump into their classroom and start kind of being a mirror and show them kind of what I'm seeing without having any kind of personal connection with them first. And the rest of the cycle talks about co-lesson planning. So I see a lot of coaches who have quick interactions with teachers, but when it comes to lesson planning, I think it's so valuable if you could spend a teacher's prep with them and actually co-create a lesson together. Instead, I often will see coaches who they're like a sounding board for teachers, and they'll give teachers ideas, but then teachers walk away with a laundry list of things they have to do. And my goal in those conversations is, or in that co-lesson planning session, is I want you to walk away with a lesson you can use, every part of it. I don't want to leave you with a huge to-do list. And then I get into how I do real-time coaching and all the other aspects of my coaching cycle in there. And again, my goal is, here are the resources I use, here's the step-by-step, so that hopefully coaches can focus on coaching instead of figuring out, how do I go about this?
Right. So coaching teachers is way different than a formal observation, that kind of thing, that kind of process.
Yes.
So in a perfect world, what would a coaching cycle and schedule look like? What would be a realistic number of teachers if someone was a full-time coach? How many teachers might they be coaching? How often might they be going into classrooms and visiting with teachers? Maybe describe what you think might be a really great arrangement there.
Oh, and it's all ideal, So there's what Catlin would love in fantasy land of coaching, and then there's the reality. And so I describe my perfect scenario in this book because I think that's what we should be striving for.
Sure.
When I go into a district, so for example, when I'm working with teachers in Healdsburg, which is a district north of me, I'm typically working with anywhere from 5 to 7 teachers at a time. And so I think oftentimes I meet coaches and they're like, I'm responsible for 150, 300 teachers. So that is super daunting, But I think my advice is start this kind of a coaching cycle with blended learning, start with the teachers you don't have to convince. Start with your early adopters, the ones who are like excited to work with you because they're energized by this. And then for some of them, you can go through the coaching cycle. Interview, goal setting, you can get into the observation debrief, you do the co-lesson planning, you do the real-time coaching, maybe model lessons and co-teaching, you do the documentation and the reflection. You might just do that once over the course of like 2.5, 3 weeks with a teacher. And then those early adopters, man, they're off and running. And then you don't need to necessarily work with them anymore. And the value with starting with them too is you don't spend as much time supporting them because they're so energized, they tend to go. And then you have classrooms that are like classrooms you can take the more hesitant teachers into so they can see it in action. And sometimes that's all teachers need is just to see it. And so once you finish a cycle with a round of teachers, then you grab your next group of most willing. That's how I would work my way down, and just know you may not get to everybody in a year, and that's okay. You're one person. And you may find that not every teacher needs the whole cycle. Some just may need a few of them, or some may need the cycle twice. So you have to be flexible. I think in this day and age, technology is not slowing down. It is only going to be more rapid, the advances, and so teachers have to continue learning, and we have to support them in that process. And I think coaching and that support through implementation is the best way to really build that professional learning community on your campus, or that infrastructure to support change, because things aren't going to stop changing, or they're not going to slow down.
I love that, and I think for me, you really just empowered us to like step back, slow down, take it easy. Don't feel like you have to coach every teacher that you're involved in working with. Make your group small and then build on that and develop those model classrooms.
And don't you think we should be like treating coaching, I mean, there's so much talk about personalization. Coaching is our opportunity to personally support teachers, and that's what teachers really need to keep growing. And I think often when coaches have so many teachers they feel responsible for, they end up doing things like, well, I'll start a Twitter account and I'll blast stuff out, or I'll have a blog and I'll post videos, and then teachers can access it. And they're trying to reach as many people as possible with those strategies, which are great strategies, but you need that personal connection to support some teachers if they're really going to make some of these big shifts in their practice.
Yeah, because learning is relational, and there's nothing that will replace that relationship, whether it's a student to teacher or coach to teacher, teacher to teacher. It really is about those relationships. So I'm so glad you're pointing that out and just helping us think about those things that are so important. As you are working with coaches, and you've recognized those that are able to progress pretty quick, and you establish some model classrooms. This is maybe stepping back a little bit. So in a model classroom, if someone was walking into the model blended class, describe to us some of the things that you've seen, because I think all our audience is always looking for, tell me what it really looks like, feels like, tastes like. So what can you describe a little bit more on that?
It's not a quiet classroom. You know?
Right? We don't have to whisper anymore. It's not a library of the 80s or whatever.
I mean, ideally, what I love seeing when I come into classrooms where I'm like, wow, this is pretty exciting, is you have like, first of all, you can't immediately spot the teacher. The teacher is in the class, but typically they're kind of almost camouflage because they're sitting right next to a student, or they're sitting with a group, like working through something with the group. I love seeing teachers immersed in what's happening, or using that freedom that blended learning gives them to really pull kids and work side by side with them. What does this learner or these 3 learners need from me right now? I also love to see the social negotiation that happens when students are given the agency to kind of figure out how to approach something. So when I walk into a classroom and I see a group, and you got like some kids standing at the table and some are sitting, and they're like, well, what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? And it's not pen to paper. They're not like, being super productive in that very traditional way that we think of students being productive. but they're like really wrestling with how do we get this done and what should this look like? And for me, I'm just like, students are leading the learning. Like they're doing the hard work in this classroom. So it's moments, it's like scenes like that that I love. And it is that little buzz, the energy, the conversations. For me, that's a really important part of blended learning, because I go into classrooms where some teachers have locked down. They'll have a station rotation and they're checking all the boxes, but man, it's silent except for the teacher at their teacher-led station. Or, you know, the online station is just kids with their headphones on and they're doing a program. And I'm kind of like, there's just something missing here. It's that relational piece. It's kids looking at each other. It's teachers and kids connecting. It's the reason we do this is to create the time and space for those interactions, and to see them neglected makes me sad.
So social. Learning is very social, so that active movement and engaging.
Yes.
So
yes.
Student agency. Talk to us about student agency and how that really draws in and engages the learner in your experiences that you've
Well, you've seen me present before or lead workshops, and I will often begin with kind of a word cloud where the group generates it, and it's what are the top pain points, what makes it hard for you to do your job, because this job is not for the faint of heart, right? Like our jobs are so multifaceted and so challenging, and oftentimes the word apathy will appear on the cloud. And you know, I think one of the things we forget as teachers, because we're thinking, well, I've got to get through all these things. Here are my standards. They are going to take this test. I got to get them ready. We forget that when we're in a situation where we don't get to make any choices, where we're asked to do something that maybe we have no interest in and that we don't get to make any decisions about, we don't like that. Kids feel the exact same way.
You mean every kid doesn't come to school ready to learn math, science, social studies, and ELA?
Do you know every kid doesn't love To Kill a Mockingbird? Like, it blows my mind because I love it. But yeah, so for me, agency, that's the piece that we should be thinking about when we design every lesson. It's not that they're going to make every choice, you know, obviously in the classroom, but I definitely think of my role almost more, the more I taught, like the more I've taught, I think of myself as like an architect of learning experiences, where like an architect, I'm kind of like sketching the plans, I've got some structure in place, but kids are building, they're making the meaning. And so the agency is in what path you want to take, and what is your product going to look like, and maybe what aspect of this do you want to focus on. And I think sometimes we get so wrapped up in what we have to do as teachers, we forget, like, what might these kids enjoy doing? And you know what, if I don't know, maybe I give them some choices, or I give them the space to kind of articulate for me what they're interested in or how they'd like to handle this.
So true, so true. I don't know. There's just so many things. I have been so honored to learn at your feet. And here's the other, the other thing, the conversation doesn't have to stop now, because you and I have connected on Twitter. I follow your blog, and it just keeps going. And the personal learning network is so valuable.
Hugely valuable.
No one has to do this work alone. No one needs to be working in a silo.
No.
How do we connect? Tell us what are your suggestions? Oh
my goodness. It's funny, when I present, I always tell teacher, and I've chosen Twitter, but you could be you can connect on Pinterest, you can connect on Facebook, wherever you're comfortable living online, there are other people you can connect with. And really, your point about we don't have to do this alone, absolutely not. Like, I learned so much of what I know from just kind of stalking interesting people online, following their Twitter feeds, and looking at blogs, you know, showing up to ed chats early on and following people who are saying interesting things. So you don't have to spend a ton of time online to get a lot of benefit. And I am constantly challenged and inspired by the people I connect with online who might share something really simple that just like sends me in a new direction or makes me have like a moment of clarity about something I've been doing one way for so long that I'm like, it's like the single point rubric that we were talking about. I used to have these crazy elaborate rubrics that were, they were beasts to fill out. And then one day I'm stumbling along the internet and somebody says single point rubric. And in my mind, now I talk about it like the single skill rubric, but it totally changed the way I approached, assessment and conversations with kids. So yeah, it's worth the time to build that personal learning network and beyond the folks who are on your campus, to be quite frank. Because sometimes I'll talk to teachers and they say, oh, well, I have so many friends on this campus, which is wonderful. But I know from my experience, when I connect with people on my campus, and we're all very positive, the conversations are kind of negative. You know, we like get fixated on this group of kids or this thing that happened or this principal's decision that we disagree with or whatever the situation may be. And the conversations aren't that inspiring, challenging conversation. They tend to be like us just venting with each other. And so when you connect with a personal, you know, you create this network online, they're more positive, the conversations. You can still have the outlet if you need to be like, oh, this day, but in terms of being inspired and challenged and getting some positivity, those online connections are invaluable.
Well, I know that just a few searches and me stumbling on your name several years ago has just led to some really deep and personalized learning for me that hopefully we've been able to share out in our district. So any of you who are watching this interview, I can't say enough wonderful things about this. My friend, we just met on Twitter a few years ago, and I think she will be a lifelong friend, someone I can forever connect with. So any last comments, thoughts? This is just awesome. I appreciate your time sharing with us.
I think just to follow up, like aggressively pursue your own learning. You know, if I waited for my school district to train me on blended, I would still be waiting. So aggressively pursue your own learning. Don't feel like you have to do it all at once. You know, little bits. Try one thing. Know you're going to make a ton of mistakes, and that's okay. That's part of learning. And I think we should be super transparent with students that we are failing in this moment or we're making a mistake and it's okay. Like, they need to feel like that's okay. So just keep kind of trying and give yourself permission to try and fail and improve, because that's what learning is all about.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I hope you've enjoyed the 12 days of innovation here in Birdville, and it's been a great learning experience for all of us involved.
Hey guys, this is Taylor from the Birdville Nest, just reminding you of all the awesome speakers we have coming to you with the 12-Day Summit. Check out 12daysummit.birdvillenest.net for other speakers, information, and the ability to sign up if you're just finding this out for the first time. Also, throw up your thoughts, ideas, strategies, and opinions at #12daysummit on Twitter.